Hey, it's Derek Depker here of bestsellersecrets.com, here with Cathy, Fyock, talking about how to write your book even if you're not a great writer. We're going to be diving into that as well as some of the things that you can do with your book, such as getting speaking engagements to promote not only your book, but also your business as a whole. Welcome, Cathy.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you because writing a book, I mean, this is, some people in my audience, they've written a book, but they're not nearly as efficient as they could be. There's a lot of tips and tactics and strategies that they could learn that would help them. And then there's a lot of people who are going to be watching this, listening to this going, I feel like I got a book inside me, but I don't know how to get it out. I don't know that first step. It's all kind of somewhere in my brain, floating around, but how do you actually take these ideas and put it into a book? So we'll get into this, but first I'd love for you to share a little bit about your backstory and how you got into helping authors.
Well, it is kind of a fun story because first I should tell you, I really don't like to write. I think it's hard work. I'm not one of these people who teachers told me, oh, you're a gifted writer. No teacher ever told me that. And no teacher encouraged me to go into writing. So it's just very fun that I'm here. For years, I worked as a human resources consultant, speaker, thought leader. And I've written books in that space as a strategy to grow my business, establish my thought leadership. And so one day I got a call from the president of my chapter of the National Speakers Association, and he said, Cathy, I heard a rumor that you wrote one of your books in less than 6 weeks. Is that right? And I said, well, yeah, actually I wrote several of my books in less than 6 weeks. And he said, do you have a process? And I thought about it for a moment. I said, yeah, I guess I do have a process. He said, would you be willing to give a program on your process to our chapter? I'm like, oh, I would love to do that. He said, before you say yes, here's what we'd really like for you to do. We have a couple of our chapter members who are working on their books. Would you be willing to be a coach to these two individuals and then give a report to the chapter? And I said, okay, you had me at give a program. I'm totally in. And I thought it'd be really fun to see if it works for other people. So I worked with these two women, and immediately they said to me, Cathy, have you ever thought about being a book coach? And I said, no, never. And so I thought about it, though, for a while and then gave my program for the chapter. And I've been a member for many years, and my friends came up to me and said, Cathy, have you ever thought if you leave this HR consulting, would you ever become a book coach? And I thought, okay, I think I'm getting the message. This is what's next for me. So that's exactly what I decided to do.
Well, what I'm hearing there is you not only had a process for yourself, but the fact that so many people were asking you, have you thought about being a coach? To me, that's an indication you must have had something in your process that helped them break through. So I'm curious, what was it, where were they at with these first people that you started helping? What was their issue and how did your process help them?
Well, there's a number of different elements to my process, but one of the key issues is that if you're going to write a book as a business growth strategy, as something to grow your business, expand your platform, then you need to write the right book, and it needs to be strategically aligned with your business. So starting with that strategic plan is absolutely critical. Not only is it critical, but it gives you as the author so much clarity and so much focus if you can really set out the strategic plan for your book. So that's where I begin with my clients, is by creating a document where we identify the purpose of the book, how it's going to be used, how it's going to be integrated, who the targeted reader is, what the thesis statement is, what the structural content outline is going to look like, and then we put together a project plan for getting it done. I'm also a believer that, you don't just sit down and write a book in one sitting. I don't think anybody does that. So it's a matter of chunking it out and looking for ways to write those chunks of narrative quickly, productively, And what I've learned too over the years is that there are some tips and ideas for getting people to turn off the editor in their brain and just let the writing come out.
Perfect. So I'd love to dive into in a moment what strategies or processes you have for shutting off that inner editor, that inner critic. It's like trying to drive with the gas and the brake pedal at the same time.
Exactly. It totally is. And it's exhausting too. We know from brain science, it's absolutely exhausting to do both editing and writing at the same time.
Yeah. And so you brought up something that's so important that I want everyone listening to this and watching this to get, and that is the first part of the process is really figuring out what is the purpose of this book. Because a great quote, I'm going to paraphrase Kenichi, I forgot the last name. It's basically, it doesn't matter how hard you row your boat if you're rowing in the wrong direction.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
that idea, like once you have that clarity, is also another quote. The idea of give me an hour to chop down a tree or 4 hours to chop down a tree. I'll spend the first 3 hours sharpening the axe. That whole idea of going, okay, once you know what purpose the book is going to serve, not just the book itself, but how does this book align with your overall business? How does this align with your overall life goals, right? And so the book, you see how the book fits into that. Then you know who you're going to serve and you get clarity on that. And then a lot of times, if you're really an expert on it, it's, in my experience and for others that I've worked with, and it sounds like for you, the actual writing and creating in the material can flow so much easier after that because you know who you're serving, what you want to say.
Yes. And so sometimes with clients, new clients, we may work quite a bit to get that strategic plan exactly right. And a lot of times I find if the author isn't quite, they don't have all of that outlined specifically, that may be why they're having trouble getting started or moving forward.
Yeah. So let's say now someone, you've worked with them, they have the strategic plan in place, and they're now getting into the writing process. And so a couple hiccups might show up, a few obstacles. One of them is, like you said, this inner editor keeps trying to jump in while they're doing the creative work. So what do you say to someone who is going through that?
Well, first of all, it's totally normal. I think everybody deals with the internal editor, the internal critic, the negative voice. In my book, On Your Mark, we call it the bitch because it is a bitch. And we tried to think of a different name for it. And honestly, we just couldn't come up with something that had the same teeth in it like the bitch. But turning off that voice is huge. The voice that tells you you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you need to rethink this, whoever said you were a good writer, who do you think you are writing this? Nobody's going to read this. You're really wasting your time. I mean, the voice says lots and lots of things. So it's first identifying what the voice is saying, what that negative voice is saying, and then developing some defense mechanisms to deal with that. Because what I find is even the most prolific writers deal with the negative voice. So it's not just for new authors, it's for every author. And learning to deal with that is huge.
You have a practical strategy, and this might not be the be all end all, maybe just one of several. Is there a particular strategy that you often find works for someone who's dealing with that voice?
Sometimes it's doing speed writing or timed writing. I'm a big fan of writing prompts, and I use these all the time with my authors. I use visual prompts, which are a little bit different. They always are writing a prompt that is relating to their topic, and I always give them a very short period of time to write. So a typical writing prompt may be 2 minutes. You have a picture, so maybe it's a bizarre picture that just gets their brain going in some different direction. But with only 2 minutes to write, and they need to write something, it forces you to just go with whatever first thought you have. And I think sometimes authors overthink their books. And so it's getting that, turning it off by just saying, look, I only have a few minutes. So So what I'm encouraging my authors to do on their own is don't ever sit down to write and give yourself an hour. Way too much time. So give yourself little chunks of writing assignments with specific time spots and specific goals that you want to achieve within those small time blocks. That will get the writing going.
Beautiful. Yeah, there's a couple things that you're doing there that's really smart psychologically. One is the having a deadline and a smaller time frame that you give yourself. It's Parkinson's law. So it's the idea like if you're gonna, constraints for many creatives, myself included, it can feel like, oh no, it's a constraint. It's limiting my creativity when it actually enhances it. In the right amount, it's like, if I give myself an endless amount of time to do something, I'll take an endless amount of time, right? And it'll just never get done. But if I say, I got 5 minutes, I cut through all the crap and I just go, I got 5 minutes. I got to produce something. I need to produce an outcome. So like you're saying, you can't overthink it. You get past the overthinking, especially also if there's not that as much of a standard of like, this has got to be a masterpiece. It's like, let's have fun with it. It sounds like it's fun if you're using these prompts and kind of bizarre ideas. And what role do you think that plays in helping the authors?
I think it's huge. I think there's some brain science to it, and I'm not a neurologist or brain science by any stretch of the imagination, but what I do know is that visual prompts enter a different part of our brain and activates the creative juices, for lack of a better, more scientific term, and that really produces some great results. So there is some brain science behind some of the things that I do.
Yeah, and it also sounds like sometimes some people just doing something different than what they're used to. So it's like if they're used to thinking writing means sitting down, staring at a blinking cursor on a blank page, that there's all that inertia of where do I even begin? What do I say? But when you give them that prompt, it gets the ball rolling. It creates that initial momentum. Like, oh, I don't have to think. I got the prompt. I got the visual. They start getting going. And then once you're going, it's a lot easier to keep the ball rolling.
Absolutely. Another strategy I use is to have authors think of as many different questions as they can that their reader would have about their topic, and just to brainstorm, just to write a list of questions. And then when they sit down to write, they're picking one of those questions and answering one question. And I love that because that means you're never sitting down to a blank screen. You're always sitting down to answer a specific question that your reader has. And that will just get the juices flowing.
Yeah, that's great. And it's clever because when someone does the work ahead of time of thinking of the questions and brainstorming and doing that as its own process, then when they're coming back into it, they can look at it. And there's also still a sense of freedom. Like, I get to choose what question I want to answer today.
And I encourage people to not go in any order. See, what inspires you? What is calling to you? What do you just already have a story or a picture or something that you want to share? And that's where you go.
Yeah. So what if someone's inner voice is saying to them, well, I'm not a good writer. Let's say that's the thing. Okay, I'm writing. I'm starting to produce stuff now. Okay, so I've gotten ideas out, but I'm looking at it, I'm going, this sucks. No one's going to want to read it. Like, how do you approach that if someone's going through it?
Okay, this is what editors are made for. We need to give editors work to do, and that's what they are paid to do. That's what they do so darn well. So I always, this is a shortcut. You never skip paying a professional editor to edit your book for you, and someone who is not your cousin who is a English teacher 3 years ago before she retired. No, this is a professional book editor that knows book editing and that can really get it done professionally so that your readers are seeing the professional that you are.
And it's important to get this idea because, I mean, saying, go to an editor, that's It's such good advice. And I think what happens, especially for a first-time author, is they forget, they haven't been through the process. So as I've been through the process, I'm a lot more forgiving with myself because I go, I don't know if this totally makes sense, but I'll have an editor go through it. I'll have beta readers. I know that that's coming up in the future. So it kind of like relieves a little pressure now. But for a first-time author, it's like, oh yeah, an editor can help with this.
Yeah, I think sometimes my first-time authors think they have to write like little gemstones, little perfect gemstones that are strung. And, it just doesn't happen that way. So just write it, get the main message out there, and then have an editing process. In fact, what I recommend for my authors is not just the professional editor, but even before that they edit it a couple of times, print it, page number it, 3-hole punch it, put it in a binder, and start marking it up. And then that they give it to an editorial board or beta readers. So folks that would represent their targeted reader who would give insights as if this doesn't quite flow, or this doesn't really make sense to me, or, I think I know what you're saying here, but I think you could say it better. So having that kind of support and feedback, I think, is incredibly important for professionals who are wanting to get their expertise out there.
Yeah, there's a quote, and there's a lot of quotes like this: writing is rewriting. And what I find once a person gets to the more professional level of writing, or they're more experienced, a lot of times it really becomes a process of trusting the rewriting process and learning how to actually remove that pressure of thinking, I got to just get this masterpiece created. It's like, no, I just got to get a draft. I just got to be good enough, and then go back through it and go back through it and go back through it, get them to give feedback, especially for experts. As an expert, like, there's the curse of knowledge. So it could make total sense in your mind because you already know the information, but it's when you give it to someone else, they're going to point out whether it really makes sense or not.
That's right. You will only, as the author, read what you intended to say, and you will never know what you really, really said unless you have beta readers or an editorial board.
Yeah. And it reminds me, sometimes I hear authors go, well, I don't know if my writing's any good. I don't think my writing's any good. And my question for them is like, well, how would you know if it's good? What lets you know that your writing is good? And they don't know. And then it's like, so you're stuck because you don't know if your writing's any good, but you won't know how to assess whether your writing's any good. Like, I can't write because I don't think my writing's good, but I won't know whether my writing's going to be any good until I start writing. And it's these stuck cycles to be like, what if you can just accept, hey, I have no idea if this is any good or not. I actually can't be my best judge. I need to just get it done and give it to someone else.
And in fact, most of the authors that I work with are experts, professionals, thought leaders, and they may not have the best writing skills. Like I say, I don't think I have the best writing skills, but I think I'm knowledgeable. I am a good communicator. And if you have those things going for you, you can write a book. So I'm all about empowering my authors to know, yes, you can do this. You don't need to hire a ghostwriter. And besides that, you probably can't afford it.
Yeah, if you have the communication skills, like you're a speaker, you're working with people who, if you're a speaker, if you're a coach, if you're working with anyone, clearly at some point your words have made an impact on someone.
Yes. And knowing that, and writing from that point of knowing that you are helping someone solve a problem, you are helping someone find a solution that they've been searching for. And coming from that perspective is always key.
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue into the idea of, you got into writing a book as a speaker. How does a book and speaking, how do those go hand in hand in your experience?
Oh my gosh, they totally do. Speakers have a unique opportunity to sell their books to their clients. Not only before you speak, so you're negotiating with the meeting planner, and I think that the question that Lois and I ask in the speaker author is, would it make sense for folks to have a deeper dive, a way to reinforce the learning, a way to take these ideas and apply them at a much deeper level? That's what a book allows the meeting planner to have happen with the audience. So positioning that even in advance. So many of my clients are selling hundreds of books on the front end. They're booking a speaking engagement and they're asking that magic question to their meeting planner: would it make sense for everyone in the audience to have a copy of my book, to reinforce the learning, or to pre-read, or however you're going to use that book in your business? So before the speaking engagement, you can sell hundreds, if not thousands, of books, and then once you speak, a lot of attendees, if they're not given a book at the front end, they want to take a little bit of you home with them, and they want to reinforce what you help them see or what you help them understand, and they want to take you home. So since they can't actually take you home, they'll take your book home, and then you have that additional revenue, so that you're adding to each group that you speak for. You are adding potential sales, and if you don't have a book, many times you're leaving money right there on the table.
Yeah, so it sounds like as a speaker, you know, for the same speaking engagement, now you can potentially sell hundreds or maybe even thousands of copies of the book in bulk from that one speaking engagement.
Yes.
So it's kind of like every time you're speaking and you don't have a book, you're thinking, how many sales am I losing?
No, yes. And if that wasn't enough, many of my speaker friends have told me, one just recently on a call, she said, I know I lost a keynote opportunity. It was a $10,000 speaking opportunity, and I lost it because I did not have the book. And she says, I have to have the book, because that's the ticket. That's the price of admission.
Yeah, could you explain a little bit more about that? So we're talking about, you know, speaking can sell books, and it can sell books in bulk, and it can do it from direct sales. It can also just do it from exposure, you know, people learning about you as an author. But then there's also the opportunity for speakers who, you know, my understanding, and I know a little bit about the speaking world, you know, done some speaking, but I certainly wouldn't call myself an expert in terms of this area. Mm-hmm. So what role does being an author versus a non-author play in a meeting planner's decision of who should we bring in as a speaker?
Well, it's becoming increasingly the case that they're looking for authors, period. So it really puts you behind the pack when you don't have a book. It puts you out of the competition for some of those choice speaking engagements, because they really are looking for authors. Because author means authority. And when meeting planners are hiring speakers, they want someone with great content. More and more today, meeting planners want the speaker to deliver fabulous content. And the book is sort of proof of performance. It's that proof that, yeah, I do know what I'm talking about. I am the expert. I did write the book on it, quite literally.
It's one of those things where if you think about the world we live in, there's more and more choices. So we have to look for sometimes, like, what are the signs and signals that this person's an expert, that they're an authority, like you're saying. And they're not necessarily going to be able to dive in and spend, 20 hours researching every single person who wants to, potentially speak for them. So when they go, oh, this person's an author, that person's not an author. Okay, well, let's default to the author is probably more of an authority, just like you're saying. Mm-hmm. So as we start to wrap it up, are there any big mistakes you see people when it comes to writing their book or, leveraging their book to grow their business that you'd like to address and say that there's something big to watch out for?
Well, just as I said at the very onset, starting with the end in mind. What do you want to use this book for? And I'll tell you a great story. One of my authors was writing a book. He had wonderful, wonderful storytelling skills, and he wanted to share some of his stories in his book. He really wanted to, he was writing the book to get more speaking engagements. That was the key goal. But when I looked at his book, the final book, before it went to the publisher, I looked at the about the author, and where did it mention that this guy was a speaker? Nowhere. It talked about all of his other credentials, but never once talked about the fact that he was not only a speaker, but a very gifted speaker. He had won storytelling awards. He had won some of the slam competitions and so forth. He was really, really gifted. But nowhere did he say that. So he was losing out on a huge opportunity. So that's why starting with the end in mind is so important. So if you want to use this book to speak, then your book should have about the author. It should talk about you as a speaker. It should have to contact Cathy for upcoming speaking engagements. Here's her contact information. Throughout the book, it should have little sprinkling, little hints of what you do as a speaker. So you might have as an example, for example, when I was speaking with this one group, this is something that came up in the conversation, and there's little subtle ways that you can plant those seeds of how you want your readers to think of you. And so starting with the end in mind is still probably one of the biggest issues that I see. So being very, very intentional with the purposes that you want to achieve with your book.
Beautiful. I've seen that. I've seen that myself sometimes with authors. They get a book. They have a book. It comes out and they're like, I got it out there, but nothing really happened. My business hasn't changed. You know, I thought like, I don't know, money would just rain from the sky and people would be calling me left and right and emails would be flooding in. It's like, well, first of all, are people getting the book? And second of all, sometimes I look at the book and I'm going, this book isn't in alignment with what you're trying to do. Just like you're saying it, what was your intention? What was the purpose of the book? Oh, it was to get speaking engagements. Are people reading the book? And like you said, it's seeding the idea, just little stories about, you know, I was speaking at such and such event. And now all of a sudden the reader is going, oh, they're a speaker. Oh, I got an event coming up. I'm looking for a speaker, right? And they're starting to sell themselves before there's even an offer or anything like that. Is not even just the speaking page, contact me for speaking engagements. They're already seeing throughout the book what you do, what your authority is. Oh, this person is speaking. Oh, this person, you know, one of my students in my training course is blah, blah, blah. Oh, this person has a course. I'm kind of curious. I wonder what their course is about. Where can I and so they're getting those seeds planted. And one of the powerful things about books in particular is a book it's not like a sales pitch. I mean, some people write it like that, but you know, ideally it's value. So when they're reading it, they're not reading it like I'm being pitched something. They're reading it in the form of, oh, I'm just getting a story, I'm getting education. And so now all of a sudden your message goes in there that, oh, they're a speaker or they're a coach or they're an expert in this area. And it's a demonstration of your expertise by the stories that you're telling. And it all comes with
performance. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it comes back to what you're saying. That means you got to know what the end in mind is.
Yeah.
You know the end, and then you work backwards and go, what do I need to insert into this book? What needs to be present in this book that leads people down this path to that end ideal outcome?
Yes, Derek.
All right. Well, is there anything else that you want to make sure that the listeners and watchers get out of this today?
I think just doing it. You know, I think a lot of people talk about it and they think about it and they dream about it, but it's another thing to just do it. And it's sitting down and carving out time on your calendar, not putting it on your to-do list, putting it on your calendar, and then just honoring that time that you have booked for writing and getting it done.
Yep, absolutely. And how can people find out more about you?
Oh, well, I would love to schedule a complimentary strategy session with folks who'd like to just learn more about me. We can brainstorm about your book, give you a few key takeaways, And I promise no hard sell, although I would like to tell you about my coaching practice, and we'll see if there's a good fit there. So they can reach me. Just send an email to me at Cathy@cathyfyock.com. Or you can go to my website, and you can see I've got some retreats coming up. I usually have one every other month, either in a real event or a virtual event. More often now virtual events, but information can be found on my website, cathyfyock.com.
Perfect. So I'll have a link to that along with this video. And for those listening, it's Cathy, Cathy, at Cathy Fyock. Fyock is spelled Fyock. So CathyFyock.com. So go, you can reach out to Cathy directly. You can also check out her website and learn more about what she's offering there. Thank you so much, Cathy, for joining us and sharing everything here today.
Great. Thank you, Derek.